Hey guys, tonight we begin with a journey so wild it might just be a tall tale or the real deal. Picture yourself in Venice, 1271. You're standing on a creaky dock, the air thick with salt and ambition. Gondolas bob in the murky canals, and merchants shout deals like they're auditioning for a medieval reality show. You're about to join a teenage Marco Polo, barely 17, as he sets off for China, a place so far away it might as well be Narnia. Spoiler alert, you might not survive the first week, what with bandits, deserts, and questionable roadside food. But don't worry, they'll guide you through this adventure, one step at a time, with just enough sass to keep you awake or lull you to sleep. I'm so glad you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment, and let me know. It's always such a delight to see the diverse community of history enthusiasts gathered here. If you enjoy this style of calm, immersive tales from the past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next installment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Venice, and it's a chaotic masterpiece. The city hums with life, narrow alleys twist like a maze, and every corner smells of fish, spices, or ambition gone stale. You dodge a cart piled high with silks, nearly tripping into a canal. These waterways are Venice's veins, carrying goods from places you've never heard of. You're surrounded by merchants, their voices sharp as they haggle over bolts of cloth or barrels of wine. Venice isn't just a city, it's a trading empire, the middleman between Europe and the East. You feel the pulse of wealth, power, and a touch of arrogance. This is where Marco Polo grew up, and you're about to step into his world. You spot Marco, a lanky kid with wide eyes and a knack for trouble. He's not alone. His father, Niccolo, and Uncle Maffio are with him, their faces weathered from years of travel. These guys aren't your average Venetians. They're the Polo family, merchants with a taste for adventure and a nose for profit. You overhear them talking about China, or Cathay, as they call it, a land of silk, gold, and a ruler named Kublai Khan. Niccolo and Maffio have been there before, about a decade ago. They met the Khan himself, who apparently liked them enough to send them back with a mission. Bring him Christian missionaries and some holy oil from Jerusalem. You raise an eyebrow. Sounds like a side quest from a fantasy novel, but it's real, at least they claim it is. You follow them to their family home, a stone building near the Rialto Bridge. Inside, it's a mix of cozy and chaotic. Maps are strewn across a table, their edges curling like ancient scrolls. You run your finger over one, tracing routes that snake through deserts and mountains. The Polos are packing sacks of grain, dried fish, and enough wine to make you wonder if they're planning a party or a pilgrimage. Marco's mother isn't thrilled, muttering about her boy being too young for this nonsense. You can't blame her. At 17, you'd rather be sneaking off to a festival than crossing half the world with no GPS. But Marco's all in. You see the spark in his eyes, the kind that says he's ready to ditch Venice's damp alleys for something bigger. You're not sure if it's courage or teenage stupidity, but it's contagious. You feel a tug, like you're about to sign up for something you'll regret. Niccolo claps Marco on the shoulder, saying they'll make history or at least make a fortune. Maffio, the quieter one, just nods, but you notice his hands tremble as he ties a knot on a sack. They've done this before, but the road to China isn't a stroll. It's a gauntlet of bandits, storms, and diseases that don't care about your last name. Let's talk about Venice for a second, because this place is the key to everything. By 1271, it's one of the richest cities in Europe, a hub for the Silk Road's western end. You're standing in a city that's basically the Amazon of the Middle Ages, shipping goods from China, India, and Persia to kings and popes. The Venetians are masters of trade, with a navy that rules the seas and a knack for turning a profit. You pass a shipyard where workers hammer planks into galleys, each one destined to carry spices or silk. This wealth funds the Polo's trip, but it also shapes Marco. He's grown up watching deals being made, hearing tales of distant lands. You can almost see his brain soaking it all in, ready to write a story the world won't forget. Hey Race, a quirky little fact. The Polos weren't the only Venetians chasing Eastern riches, but they were among the few who claimed to meet Kublai Khan. Most merchants stuck to trading posts in the Black Sea or Persia, never venturing as far as China. The Polos, though, they went all in like they were auditioning for a medieval travel show. You wonder if they were brave or just reckless. Maybe both. Their first trip without Marco took them to the Mongol court in the 1260s. They came back with stories that sounded like fairy tale cities of gold, a ruler who drank from jeweled cups. You're not sure whether to believe them, and neither were their neighbors. You're at the docks again, and it's time to go. The Polo's ship is ready, a clunky vessel that looks like it's seen better days. You climb aboard, the deck creaking under your feet. The sails flap in the breeze, and you taste salt on your lips. Marco's grinning like he's won the lottery, but you notice Niccolo scanning the horizon, his jaw tight. The plan is to sail to Acre, a crusader port in the Holy Land, then head overland through Persia and Central Asia. It's a route that'll take years, and you're already regretting not packing better shoes. You overhear a sailor muttering about storms in the Mediterranean. Great start. As you pull away from Venice, the city shrinks behind you. The golden domes of St. Mark's Basilica catch the sunlight, and you feel a pang of homesickness. You're leaving behind everything familiar pizza won't even exist for centuries, so don't get your hopes up. Marcos leaning over the railing, watching the waves. You wonder what's going through his head. Is he dreaming of adventure, or just trying not to puke? You pat his shoulder, but he's too busy staring at the sea to notice. This kid's about to see things no Venetian has seen, or so hell claim. Let's hit pause on the romance of travel and talk about the elephant in the room. Did Marco Polo actually go to China? Historians have been bickering about this for centuries, and they're still at it. Some say his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, is a first-hand account, packed with details only someone who'd been there could know, like the layout of Kublai's palace or the use of paper money. Others call it a medieval fanfic, stitched together from rumors and other travelers' tales. You're skeptical, and you should be. Marco's about to describe a world so fantastical it'll make you question everything. But for now, you're on this ship, heading toward the unknown. You settle into a corner of the deck, wrapping a cloak around you as the wind picks up. The crew's shouting orders, and you're trying not to think about how deep the water is. You glance at Marco, who's scribbling something on a scrap of parchment. Already taking notes? You smirk. This kid's got big plans. You overhear Niccolo and Mafio talking about the Mongol Empire, how it stretched from Korea to Eastern Europe. The Mongols, they say, are the key to this trip. Their empire's roads and postal system make travel safer than it would be otherwise. You're not convinced safe is the right word, but you're along for the ride. The ship rocks and you grip the railing. You're passing islands now, their cliffs glowing in the sunset. You think about the road ahead, years of travel, languages you don't speak, foods that'll probably give you food poisoning. The Polos are aiming for the court of Kublai Khan, a man who rules an empire bigger than anything Europe's ever seen. You've heard he's curious, generous, but also not someone you'd want to cross. You hope Marco's charm works on him because you're not sure your medieval survival skills are up to par. Back to that quirky fact. Did you know the Polos carried letters from the Pope on their first trip? Yeah, Pope Gregory X gave them a message for Kublai Khan, along with that holy oil the Khan requested. It's like they were medieval FedEx, delivering diplomatic mail across continents. You're impressed, but also wondering why Kublai cared about Christian oil. Was he just curious? Or was there a bigger plan? You file that away for later because the ship's starting to sway and you're more focused on not losing your lunch. You're a few days out from Venice now, and the sea's calmer. You're sitting with Marco, who's telling you about his dad's stories, palaces with golden roofs, markets where you can buy anything from pearls to peacock feathers. You're half listening, half wondering if he's exaggerating already. The Mongols, he says, have a system of relay stations like pit stops for travelers. You nod because that sounds useful, but you're still stuck on the idea of a teenager crossing Asia. You're not sure you'd trust Marco to navigate a grocery store, let alone the Silk Road. Let's circle back to the controversy because it's juicy. Some historians argue Marco never made it past Persia, that he stayed in a trading post and collected stories from merchants. They point out weird gaps in his book, like no mention of the Great Wall or tea, which you'd think would be hard to miss. Others defend him, saying he described things like coal and asbestos, which were unknown in Europe. You're torn. The kid's enthusiasm is infectious, but you're starting to wonder if he's more storyteller than explorer. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're not sure who to believe. You're nearing Acre now, the ship gliding toward a port bustling with crusaders, merchants, and spies. You smell smoke and roasted meat, a welcome change from the ship's stale bread. Marco's practically bouncing, ready to set foot on land. You're less thrilled because Acre's just the start. From here, it's deserts, mountains, and who knows what else. You adjust your cloak, wishing you'd pack sunscreen. Marco's talking about meeting Kublai Khan like it's no big deal. You roll your eyes. This kid's either a genius or in way over his head. You step off the ship, your legs wobbly from days at sea. Acres of melting pot Arabs, Italians, and knights in rusty armor all jostling for space. You follow the Polos through the market, where vendors hawk everything from dates to daggers. Nicolo's haggling for horses because the next leg is overland. You're not a fan of horses, but walking to China isn't an option. Marco's already charming a local merchant, asking about the road to Persia. You shake your head. This kid's got guts, you'll give him that. As you leave Acre behind, the road stretches out, dusty and endless. You're walking beside Marco, who's still talking about Cathay like it's the promised land. You're not sure what's waiting for you: adventure, danger, or just a really long walk. But you're here now, and there's no turning back. The Polos are your guides, and Marco's your storyteller. Whether he's telling the truth or spinning a yarn, you're about to find out. You're trudging along a dusty trail, the sun scorching your neck like you're a rotisserie chicken. Acre's chaos is a distant memory, and you're now deep into the Silk Road, a path that's less road and more endless dirt track to nowhere. The Polos are ahead, Nicolo scanning the horizon, Mafio muttering about the price of horses, and Marco, your teenage tour guide, gawking at everything like it's a theme park. You're not sure if you're on an epic adventure or a medieval death march, but the blisters on your feet vote for the latter. The air smells of sweat and camel dung, and you're starting to regret every life choice that led you here. Still, there's no turning back, so you tighten your cloak and keep pace, wondering if Marco's tales of China are worth this hassle. The Silk Road isn't one path, it's a network of trails stretching from Europe to Asia, like a spiderweb of trade and trouble. You're on one of its main arteries, cutting through Persia toward Central Asia. Caravans pass you, their camels loaded with silk, spices, and stuff you're pretty sure is contraband. Merchants shout in languages you don't understand, their voices mixing with the jangle of bells and the groan of cartwheels. You dodge a pile of something you'd rather not identify and stick close to the Polos. This route's been active for centuries, linking east and west, carrying not just goods but ideas, religions, and the occasional plague. You shudder, hoping that last one skips your trip. You're walking through a landscape that's both stunning and brutal. To your left, mountains rise like jagged teeth, their peaks dusted with snow even in this heat. To your right, the land flattens into a sea of scrub and sand, shimmering under the sun. You squint, wishing for sunglasses. The Polos don't seem fazed. Nicolo's got the focus of a man who's done this before, and Mafio's grumbling but steady. Marco, though, he's practically skipping, pointing out a hawk circling overhead or a weird rock shaped like a face. You roll your eyes. This kid's enthusiasm is exhausting, but it's also keeping you sane. Let's talk about the Silk Road's big picture because it's kind of a big deal. By the 13th century, it's the backbone of global trade, connecting China's silk markets to Europe's hungry elite. You're walking a route that's seen Buddhist monks, Persian poets, and Roman traders, all chasing wealth or wisdom. The Mongol Empire, which controls most of this path, is the reason it's even possible. Their Pax Mongolica, fancy term for we rule everything, so play nice keeps bandits in check and roads open. You're grateful for that because the guy eyeing your bag from the last caravan didn't look friendly. The Mongols' postal system, with relay stations every few miles, means news and goods move fast. You're impressed, but also wondering why they couldn't invent air conditioning. You stop at one of these stations, a mud brick building that's more stable than palace. Your legs ache, and you collapse onto a bench, gulping water that tastes like dirt. Marco's chatting with a Mongol courier who's swapping horses faster than you can blink. These guys are hardcore, riding hundreds of miles in days, carrying messages for Kublai Khan. You overhear Marco asking about China, his eyes wide as the courier describes cities with 1 million people. You raise an eyebrow. 1 million? In Venice, you'd be lucky to find 10,000 folks who aren't yelling at each other. Marco's eating it up, and you're starting to wonder if he's already planning his bestseller. Here's a weird little tidbit. The Silk Road wasn't just about silk. Sure, China's fancy fabric was the star, but you're passing caravans hauling glass from Persia, furs from Russia, and even rhubarb, yes, rhubarb as a medicine. You smirk, imagining some noble paying a fortune for pie ingredients. The Polos are trading too, bartering Venetian wool for spices that smell like a chef's fever dream. You're no merchant, but you can see why they're hooked. Every deal's a gamble, and the payoff could be huge or leave you broke in a desert. You pat your empty pockets, glad you're just along for the story. The road gets rougher as you climb into the Pamir Mountains. The air's thin, and every step feels like you're wading through molasses. You're bundled in furs now, your breath puffing out in clouds. The trail narrows, hugging cliffs that drop into nothingness. You glance down and immediately regret it. Marco's still chattering, unfazed, telling you about a trader he met who saw a snow leopard. You're more concerned about not becoming lunch for one. Nicolo leads the way, his eyes sharp for rock slides or worse. You've heard stories of bandits who'd rob you blind and leave you for the vultures. You grip your walking stick a little tighter. You're crossing a high pass now, the wind howling like it's got a personal grudge. Your fingers are numb, and you're pretty sure your nose is about to fall off. The Polos huddle together, checking their map, a tattered thing that's more art than science. You peek over their shoulder, but it's all squiggles and guesswork. How do they even know where they're going? You ask Marco, who just shrugs and says, "Dad's got a knack." Great. You're trusting your life to Nicolo's knack. You mutter a prayer, hoping it's enough to get you through this frozen hellscape. Let's hit the brakes for a second and talk about the dangers here, because they're real. The Silk Road wasn't a tourist trap, it was a survival gauntlet. You're dodging avalanches, dysentery, and tribes who don't take kindly to strangers. The Mongols might keep the peace, but they can't control the weather or the wolves. You're starting to get why most traders stick to shorter routes. The Polos, though, are aiming for the jackpot, direct access to China's markets. You admire their guts, but you're also wondering if they've lost their minds. Marco's scribbling notes again, describing the mountains like he's writing poetry. You shake your head. Kid's got a future if he doesn't freeze first. You descend into a valley, and the air feels like a warm hug. You're in Central Asia now, where the land's a patchwork of oases and dust. You stop at a caravanserai, a roadside inn that's like a medieval truck stop. Merchants swap stories over bowls of stew, and you're pretty sure the meat's from a creature you don't want to name. Marcos in his element, listening to a Turkic trader talk about Samarkand, a city of blue-tiled mosques and markets that never sleep. You're intrigued, but also wondering if the stew's going to fight back later. You take a cautious sip, hoping for the best. Hey, race where things get murky. Did Marco really see all this? Historians are still bickering about whether he walked this road or just heard about it in some Persian bazaar. His book describes places like Samarkand with vivid detail, but he skips stuff you'd expect like the local languages or the smell of camel spit. Some say he was here, soaking it all in. Others think he's a glorified gossip, collecting tales from traders. You're not sure who to believe, but Marcos' excitement is contagious. He's pointing out a caravan carrying jade, saying it's headed for Kublai's court. You nod, trying to look like you care, but you're mostly focused on not tripping over a rock. You're back on the road, and it's flattening out. The Taklamakan Desert looms ahead, a name that roughly translates to go in, don't come out. You're not thrilled, but the Polos are undeterred. Nicolo's talking about skirting the desert's edge, following oases to avoid becoming human jerky. You're grateful for his experience because you're pretty sure you'd be lost by now. Marco's still taking notes, describing a mirage that looks like a lake. You squint, but it's just more sand. You're starting to think this kid sees the world differently, half explorer, half dreamer. The desert's edge is brutal, but you're managing. You're sipping water sparingly, your lips cracked like old leather. The Polos trade for camels, which are grumpy and smell like regret. You climb onto one, and it immediately tries to spit on you. Marco laughs, saying you'll get used to it. You doubt it. The caravan moves slowly, guided by stars and the occasional milestone stone markers left by traders long gone. You're impressed by the system, but also wondering how anyone survives this. The Mongols' relay stations are a lifeline, offering water and shelter, but they're few and far between. You're nearing the end of this leg, and China's still a distant dream. You're in a small oasis town now, its mud walls glowing in the moonlight. You collapse onto a mat, too tired to care about the bugs. Marco's sitting by a fire, telling you about Kublai Khan's palace, how it's got walls of marble and roofs of gold. You're half asleep, but you can't help smiling. This kid's either seen it or he's got one hell of an imagination. You're betting on the latter, but you're not ready to call him out yet. The road's long, and you're just getting started. You're standing on the edge of a bustling city, your boots caked with desert dust. The air hums with voices, the clatter of carts, and the faint chime of temple bells. You've made it to Xanadu, upper capital of the Yuan dynasty, summer retreat of Kublai Khan. The journey's been a blur of sand, sweat, and camels with attitude, but now you're here, in Cathay, as Marco calls it. The city sprawls before you, a maze of palaces and pavilions, their roofs gleaming like dragon scales under the sun. You're not sure if you're more awestruck or just relieved to be off that camel. Marco's practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes darting everywhere. You nudge him, half joking that he'll sprain his neck. Welcome to China, you think, hope it's worth the blisters. You follow the Polos through Xanadu's gates, dodging merchants hawking silk and street cooks flipping dumplings like they're in a cooking show. The streets are wide, paved with stone, and cleaner than anything you saw in Venice. You're impressed, but also wondering how they keep it so tidy. People rush past Mongols in furs, Chinese in flowing robes, and traders from who knows where. You catch snippets of languages you can't place, a symphony of commerce and chaos. The Polos seem at ease, like they've been here before. Well, Niccolo and Mafio have Marcos the newbie, and you're right there with him, gawking at everything. Let's set the stage. It's 1275, and you're in the heart of the Yuan dynasty, ruled by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis. The Mongols have conquered half the world, from Korea to Persia, creating an empire so vast it makes Venice look like a village. Xanadu's their summer capital, a place of cool breezes and green hills, where Kublai escapes the heat of his main city, Kanbalik. You're standing in a realm of wealth and power, where silk flows like water and gold's just another decoration. The Yuan dynasty's a melting pot, blending Mongol might with Chinese culture, and you're about to dive in headfirst. You trail the Polos to a guest house, a low building with a curved roof and paper windows. Inside, it's cool and smells faintly of jasmine. You collapse onto a mat, your body thanking you for the break. Niccolo's talking to a Mongol official presenting letters from Venice and the Pope. You're not sure what's in them, but the official nods, his face unreadable. Marco scribbling notes, describing the city's walls painted red and gold. He says, like a sunset caught in stone. You smirk. Kids got away with words, but you're more focused on the bowl of noodles someone hands you. You slurp one, and it's heaven spicy, chewy, and better than anything you've eaten in weeks. Hey Race, a fun little fact. Xanadu's the inspiration for Xanadu in that poem by Coleridge, but it's not just poetic fluff. This place was real, with gardens so lush they'd make a botanist cry. Kublai had deer and peacocks roaming the grounds, and a portable palace made of bamboo that could be packed up like a fancy tent. You're dying to see it, but right now, you're stuck in bureaucracy land. The Polos are waiting for an audience with the Khan, and you're wondering if you'll need to bribe someone to speed things up. You pat your pockets empty as usual. You're out exploring Xanadu now, weaving through markets that make Venice's Rialto look like a flea market. Stalls overflow with jade, porcelain, and spices that tickle your nose. You pause at a silk merchant's booth, the fabric so smooth it feels like water. Marcos bargaining with the vendor, his Italian accent clashing with the man's rapid Chinese. You're impressed he's picking up the language fast, or at least faking it well. You try to say hello in Chinese, but it comes out like a cat choking. Marco laughs, saying you'll get the hang of it. You're not so sure. The city's a marvel, and it's not just the markets. You pass a canal where boats glide, loaded with grain and timber. Bridges arch over the water, carved with dragons that seem to watch you. You're starting to get why Marco's book goes on about this place. The Yuan dynasty's got engineering down to an art, roads, canals, and cities planned with precision. You're walking through a system that keeps millions fed and an empire humming. Venice might be rich, but this is next level. You feel a twinge of envy, wondering why Europe can't get its act together like this. You're back at the guest house when word comes. Kublai Khan wants to see you. Well, not you specifically, the Polos, but you're tagging along. Your stomach flips. Meeting the most powerful man in the world? No pressure. You adjust your tunic, hoping you don't smell too much like camel. The Polos are calm, or at least pretending to be. Nicolo's got that steely look, mafios checking their gifts, silk, jewels, and that holy oil from Jerusalem. Marcos nervous but trying to play it cool, muttering about how Kublai's court is bigger than Street Mark Square. You nod, but you're more worried about tripping over your own feet in front of the Khan. The palace is a short walk, but it feels like a pilgrimage. You pass guards in leather armor, their spears glinting. The building looms, its roof curving like a wave frozen in time. You step inside, and it's like walking into a dream. The hall's massive, with pillars painted in crimson and gold. Silk tapestries hang on the walls, showing scenes of battles and hunts. You're trying not to stare, but it's impossible. Marcos whispering about the floor marble, polished so bright you can see your reflection. You glance down and wince. Yep, you definitely need a bath. Kublai Khan sits on a throne, and he's not what you expected. He's older, maybe in his 60s, with a beard streaked gray. His eyes are sharp, though, like he's sizing you up and already knows your secrets. You bow, hoping you're doing it right. The Polos step forward, offering their gifts. Nicolo speaks, his voice steady, recounting their journey and their loyalty to the Khan. You're impressed he's smooth, like a medieval diplomat. Kublai listens, then gestures to Marco. You freeze. The kid's being called out already. Marco steps up, and you're praying he doesn't say something dumb. Hey, race where things get wild. Kublai takes a liking to Marco. You're not sure why, maybe it's his enthusiasm or just that he's young and moldable. The Khan asks him questions about Venice, about Europe, about the Pope. Marco answers, stumbling a bit but with a charm that's hard to resist. You're shocked. This teenager's holding his own with the ruler of half the world. Kublai smiles and you relax a fraction. The Polos are unofficially welcomed to the court. You're not sure what that means for you, but you're sticking with them because this is getting good. Let's talk about the Yuan dynasty's power, because it's the backbone of this story. Kublai Khan rules an empire of millions, with a bureaucracy that puts Europe's feudal mess to shame. He's got officials managing everything from taxes to irrigation, and a military that could crush any army you've seen. The Mongols are nomadic at heart, but they've adapted, blending their ways with Chinese systems. You're walking through a world where Mongol horsemen and Confucian scholars coexist, sometimes awkwardly. It's a balancing act, and Kublai's the one keeping it together. But hey, race the catch. Did Marco really see all this? Historians are still arguing over whether he stood in this palace or just heard about it from his dad. His book describes Xanadu's splendor, but some say it's too vague, like he's parroting rumors. Others point out details like the Khan's hunting falcons that feel too specific to be made up. You're torn. Marco's excitement feels real, but you're starting to notice he's good at spinning a story. You glance at him, chatting with a courtier now, and wonder if he's already embellishing for his audience back home. You're dismissed from the palace, and you're back in Xanadu streets, your head spinning. The Polos are staying, tasked with some vague service to the Khan. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds like you're not leaving anytime soon. You pass a temple, its roof tiled in green, and hear monks chanting. The city's alive, pulsing with energy, and you're caught up in it. Marcos talking about Canbalic, the winter capital, saying it's even grander. You groan. More travel? Your feet are already plotting a mutiny. You're settling into Xanadu, and it's growing on you. The food's amazing dumplings, rice, and some weird fruit you can't name. You're getting used to the noise, the crowds, the sense that you're in the center of the world. Marcos, your guide, pointing out details you'd miss: the way a merchant weighs silver, the patterns on a noble's robe. You're starting to see Cathay through his eyes, and it's dazzling. Whether it's all true or half invented, you're hooked, ready for whatever comes next. You're standing in the heart of Kublai Khan's court in Canbalic, the winter capital, and it's like stepping into a painting that's way too extra. The palace sprawls around you, all marble floors and silk-draped walls, with golden statues that probably cost more than Venice's entire fleet. You're trying not to gape, but it's hard. Incense curls in the air, mixing with the scent of roasted meat from some feast you weren't invited to. Courtiers glide past in robes that shimmer like peacock feathers, their whispers buzzing like a hive. Marcos beside you, his teenage swagger dialed up to 11, acting like he owns the place. You nudge him, muttering to keep it chill, but he's too busy eyeing a jade vase to listen. You're in the big leagues now, and you're hoping you don't trip over a rug and embarrass yourself in front of the Khan. You've been in Cathay a few months, long enough to swap your dusty cloak for a silk tunic that feels like wearing a cloud. The Polos have settled into court life, and you're along for the ride. A wide-eyed tag-along in a world that's equal parts dazzling and overwhelming. Niccolò and Mafio are off handling trade deals, their Venetian hustle fitting right in with the empire's commerce. Marco, though, he's the Khan's new favorite toy, always being summoned for chats about Europe or to gush about some random gadget he saw in the market. You're starting to think this kid's charm is a superpower, but you're also wondering how long he can keep it up without slipping. The court's a machine, and you're seeing it in action. Kublai Khan runs this place like a CEO with a sword collection. You watch him hold court, seated on a throne carved with dragons, his voice calm but heavy, like he could order a feast or an execution with the same tone. Advisors scurry around, presenting scrolls with tax reports or maps of new conquests. You're impressed this guy's juggling an empire bigger than anything you've dreamed of, and he's doing it with style. The Mongols might have started as nomads, but they've built a system here that's got Chinese bureaucrats nodding in approval. You're starting to get why Marcos obsessed with this place. Let's zoom out for a second. The Yuan dynasty's court is the nerve center of an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. By 1275, Kublai's got millions of subjects, a treasury bursting with silver, and a knack for blending Mongol grit with Chinese finesse. The court's a mix of cultures: Mongol warriors, Chinese scholars, Persian astronomers, even a few Europeans like the Polos. You're walking through a place where ideas collide, from Buddhist texts to Islamic math. It's chaotic but brilliant, like a medieval think tank with better outfits. You're starting to see why the Polos ditched Venice for this. They're not just merchants here, they're players in a global game. You're trailing Marco through the palace, dodging servants carrying trays of fruit you can't name. He's headed for the Khan's library, a room stuffed with scrolls and books that make your head spin. You step inside, and it's like a nerd's paradise: shelves stretched to the ceiling, packed with texts in Chinese, Persian, and scripts you don't recognize. Marcos flipping through a book on astronomy, muttering about stars and compasses. You're half listening, mostly wondering how they keep the place from catching fire with all these candles. Kublai's big on knowledge, apparently collecting scholars like some kings collect horses. You're impressed, but also wishing you'd paid more attention in school. Here's a quirky tidbit. The court had a thing for falcons, and not just for hunting. Kublai's got a whole squad of them, trained to perch on his arm like feathered bodyguards. You see one now, its eyes glinting as a handler feeds it a scrap of meat. Marcos obsessed, saying the Khan takes them on hunts that sound like military campaigns for birds. You're not sure why a ruler needs a hawk posse, but it's kind of cool. You're just hoping one doesn't mistake your head for a landing pad. Marco laughs, saying you're safe probably. You glare at him, but he's already back to his book. You're invited to a banquet, and it's next level. The hall's bigger than a cathedral, with tables groaning under piles of food: roast lamb, steamed buns, and some fish dish that's staring back at you. You grab a dumpling, and it's a flavor bomb, all savory and soft. Musicians play something twangy, and dancers spin in silk robes that catch the light. You're trying to eat without spilling on your tunic, but it's a losing battle. Marcos chatting up a Mongol noble, asking about their horse races. You're amazed he's 17, but he's working the room like a pro. You wonder if Kublai's noticed, because this kid's got ambassador written all over him. The Khan himself makes an entrance, and the room goes quiet. He's in a robe embroidered with gold, looking every bit the emperor. You bow, hoping you're not butchering the etiquette. Kublai's got a reputation for curiosity, and you see it now. He's asking Marco about Venetian ships, his eyes sharp with interest. Marcos answering, describing galleys like he's selling them. You're holding your breath, praying he doesn't oversell it. Kublai nods, then moves on, and you exhale. Marcos grinning like he just won a prize, and you're starting to think he might actually pull this off. Let's talk about court life, because it's a world unto itself. The palace is a city within a city, with thousands of people: cooks, scribes, guards, and random cousins of the Khan all buzzing around. You're living in a guest house nearby, a fancy setup with silk bedding and a view of the gardens. You're getting used to the routine. Mornings at the market, afternoons dodging court politics, evenings at banquets where you eat too much and regret it. The Polos fit right in, especially Marco, who's picking up Mongol customs like he was born here. You're trying to keep up, but you're still confused by the teething why boil leaves. Seriously? You're out in the gardens now, a sprawl of ponds and pavilions that's like a fairy tale minus the dragons. You're walking with Marco, who's ranting about the Khan's zoo. Yep, a zoo with tigers and elephants. You're dying to see it, but you're stuck on official business. Kublai's tasked the Polos with inspecting a trade route, and Marcos tagging along, probably to take more notes. You're not sure what your role is, but you're here, dodging peacocks and trying not to step on the flowers. The gardens are peaceful, but you can feel the empire's weight. Every blade of grass is here because Kublai says so. Here's where the historians start bickering. Did Marco really live this life? His book describes the court in vivid detail: banquets, gardens, the whole shebang, but some say it's too polished, like he's describing a painting he saw in Persia. Others argue he nails specifics, like the Khan's postal system, that only an insider would know. You're not sure who's right. Marcos right here, charming a courtier with a story about Venice's canals, and it feels real. But there's a nagging doubt his stories are almost too good, like he's already editing them for his book. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're starting to see why. You're back in the palace, watching a debate between a Buddhist monk and a Taoist priest. It's like a philosophical cage match, with Kublai as the referee. You're fascinated. This guy's not just a conqueror, he's a thinker, juggling religions like a diplomat. Marcos taking notes, whispering that Kublai leans Buddhist but keeps everyone happy. You're impressed, but also wondering how he avoids picking a side. The court's a balancing act, And you're starting to see the cracks: Mongols versus Chinese, tradition versus empire. You're glad you're just a visitor, because this place is a political minefield. You're wrapping up the day, sprawled on a mat in the guest house. Marcos reading by candlelight, his face lit up as he describes Kanbalik's walls 4 miles long. He says, with gates for every mood. You're half asleep, but you can't help smiling. This kid's in love with Cathay, and it's rubbing off on you. The court's a whirlwind, but it's alive, pulsing with power and possibility. You're not sure how long you'll stay, but for now you're all in, ready to see what Marco discovers next. You're wandering through Kanbalik's bustling streets, your senses on overload. The air's thick with the smell of charcoal and sesame oil, and vendors shout over each other, hawking everything from steamed buns to shiny brass bells. You dodge a cart piled high with bamboo, nearly tripping into a canal that glints under the midday sun. Marcos ahead, his teenage curiosity pulling him toward a workshop where sparks fly like tiny stars. You're in the Yuan dynasty's heart, surrounded by inventions that make Venice's shipyards look like a kid's science project. You're starting to get why Marco's book reads like a love letter to this place. Catay's a tech wonderland, and you're about to get a front row seat. You follow Marco into the workshop, a cramped space buzzing with activity. Craftsmen hammer metal and carve wood, their hands moving like they're conducting an orchestra. You're staring at a contraption that looks like a giant crossbow, only weirder. Marco's chatting with the head craftsman, a wiry guy with ink-stained fingers, who's explaining it's a trebuchet, a siege weapon that can lob stones the size of your head. You're impressed, but also glad you're not on the receiving end. Marco's scribbling notes, his eyes wide as he describes the machine's gears. You smirk. This kid's geeking out, and it's kind of endearing. Let's talk big picture. The Yuan dynasty's a technological powerhouse. By the 1270s, China's been innovating for centuries, and the Mongols are smart enough to keep the good stuff going. You're in a world with paper money, gunpowder, and canals that make Venice's look like ditches. The empire's got astronomers mapping stars, engineers building bridges, and printers churning out books faster than you can read them. It's not just about gadgets, it's a system that keeps millions fed, clothed, and governed. You're walking through a society that's figured out how to scale up, and it's blowing your mind. You're back on the street, trailing Marco to a market stall where a merchant's showing off paper money. You pick up a note, thin as a leaf with red and black ink stamped in neat rows. This weird Venice runs on gold and silver, but here this paper's as good as coin. Marco explains it's backed by the Khan's treasury, and nobody dares fake it because, well, Kublai's not big on second chances. You're skeptical, but the merchant takes the note and hands over a sack of rice without blinking. You're starting to see the genius: no heavy coins, just lightweight cash that keeps the empire humming. Hey race, a quirky fact. The Chinese were using gunpowder for fireworks long before it was weaponized. You're at a festival now, the night sky exploding with colors that make your jaw drop. Marcos grinning, saying the Mongols use the same stuff to blast enemies with fire lances, basically proto-cannons. You're torn between awe and mild terror, imagining what a spark could do in the wrong hands. The crowd cheers as another burst lights up the sky, and you're caught up in the magic, even if you're double-checking for stray embers. You're invited to see the Imperial Postal System, and it's like UPS on steroids. You're at a relay station outside Kanbalik, watching couriers swap horses faster than you can tie your shoes. These guys cover hundreds of miles in days, carrying messages on silk scrolls or tax reports sealed with wax. Marcos obsessed, saying the system's got thousands of stations across the empire, each with fresh horses and supplies. Your impressed Venice's messengers are basically guys with sore feet, but this is next-level logistics. You're starting to get why Kublai's empire runs so smoothly. It's all about speed and control. You're riding with Marco to check out a canal, because apparently he's now the Khan's go-to guy for random errands. The waterway's massive, stretching as far as you can see, with barges gliding like they're on rails. You learn it's part of the Grand Canal, linking north and south, moving grain to feed cities. Marcos rattling off stats hundreds of miles long, dug by hand over centuries. You're floored. This isn't just engineering, it's a statement of power. You're starting to wonder if Europe's even on the same planet as this place. Back in Kanbalik, you're at a printing shop and it's a game changer. Workers carve wooden blocks, smear them with ink, and press them onto paper, churning out books like it's no big deal. You pick up a page, the characters sharp and clean. Marco says they've been doing this for ages, spreading everything from poetry to tax codes. Your jealous Venice's scribes are still copying by hand, cursing every smudge. This text's not just about books, it's about ideas moving fast, keeping the empire connected. You're starting to see why Marco's so starry-eyed about Cathay. Hey race, where the historians get spicy. Did Marco actually see all this tech? His book gushes about paper money and canals, but some say he's just repeating trader gossip. Others argue he nails details like the postal system's bell signals that only someone who'd been there would know. You're not sure. Marcos right here, sketching a water wheel like it's his job, and it feels legit. But there's a flicker of doubt. His stories are almost too perfect, like he's polishing them for effect. Historians are still debating this, and you're starting to lean toward skeptic, even if you're rooting for him. You're at a palace workshop now, watching engineers tinker with a compass. It's a simple thing, a magnetized needle floating in water, but Marcos acting like it's the holy grail. He says sailors use it to navigate, and the Chinese have had it for ages. You're impressed, but also wondering why Venice is still guessing directions by the stars. The engineers are talking about improving it, and Marcos soaking it all up, asking questions that make you dizzy. You're starting to think this kid's not just a tourist, he's a sponge, absorbing everything to take back home. You're wrapping up the day at a tea house, sipping something bitter that Marco swears is good for you. The place is cozy, with low tables and cushions that make your aching legs sing. You're watching people play a board game with black and white stones, their moves slow and deliberate. Marco's trying to learn the rules, but he's losing badly to a smug merchant. You laugh, saying he's better at storytelling than strategy. He grins, unfazed, and starts describing a bridge he saw, with arches so perfect they look like they're floating. You're half listening, lulled by the tea and the hum of voices. You're starting to love this place, tech and all. The Yuan dynasty's not just about palaces, it's about ideas that work, from canals to compasses. You're seeing it through Marcos' eyes, and it's dazzling, even if you're not sure how much is true. You're sprawled on a cushion now, the tea house's lanterns casting soft light. Marco's still talking, his voice a steady hum, painting pictures of a world that's bigger than you ever imagined. You're hooked, ready to see what marvel he stumbles on next. You're stepping off a boat onto the docks of Hangzhou, and it's like walking into a fever dream of color and noise. The air's thick with the scent of lotus flowers and sizzling street food, and the Grand Canal behind you hums with barges loaded to the brim. You're in one of the Yuan dynasty's crown jewels, a city Marco calls the finest in the world, and you're not sure he's exaggerating. Temples with upturned roofs gleam in the sunlight, and markets spill over with silk, jade, and enough fish to feed an army. Marcos practically bouncing, pointing out a pagoda like it's his personal discovery. You roll your eyes, muttering that he's seen one. He's seen them all, but you're secretly dazzled. This is Cathay's urban playground, and you're ready to explore. You weave through Hangzhou streets, dodging rickshaws and kids chasing kites. The city's alive, pulsing with a rhythm that makes Venice feel like a sleepy hamlet. You pass a canal where women wash silk, their hands moving like dancers, and a bridge so ornate you're afraid to step on it. Marcos leading the way, his notebook tucked under his arm, already scribbling about the city's 12,000 bridges. Yeah, he counted, or so he claims. You're skeptical, but the place is so packed with waterways you're starting to believe him. You're here on a vague errand for Kublai, something about trade routes, but you're mostly just soaking it all in. Let's set the scene. Hangzhou, or Linen as it was called under the Song dynasty, is a megacity by 1270s standards. It's got maybe 1 million people, sprawling markets, and a reputation as the cultural heart of China. The Yuan dynasties kept it thriving, using its wealth to fund Kublai's empire. You're walking through a hub of art, poetry, and commerce, where scholars sip tea while merchants haggle over porcelain. The city's a showcase of what China can do when it's firing on all cylinders, organized, opulent, and just a little overwhelming. You're starting to get why Marcos' book spends pages raving about this place. You stop at a market and it's sensory overload. Stalls overflow with peaches, lacquered bowls, and birds in bamboo cages that chirp like they're auditioning for a choir. You grab a skewer of grilled meat, spicy enough to make your eyes water, and hand one to Marco, who's bargaining for a fan painted with mountains. He's getting better at Chinese, tossing out phrases that earn a nod from the vendor. You're impressed, but also wondering how he's got the energy after months of court life and travel. You take a bite of the skewer, and it's heaven until you realize you're out of cash. Marco laughs, tossing the vendor a coin for you. Show off. Here's a quirky tidbit. Hangzhou's markets sold dragon bones, which were actually dinosaur fossils ground into medicine. You're passing a stall now, where an old man's peddling powdered bone, claiming it'll cure anything from headaches to bad luck. You raise an eyebrow, but the locals are buying it up like it's the next big thing. Marcos intrigued, asking if it's really dragon, and the vendor winks, saying it's close enough. You're chuckling, but also wondering what else they're grinding into potions around here. Marco jots it down, probably planning to wow Venetians with tales of dragon dust. You're invited to a theater, and it's not what you expected. The stage is open air, with actors in painted masks belting out a story about a warrior and a ghost. The music's all gongs and strings, and you're hooked, even if you don't catch half the words. Marcos whispering translations, saying it's a Yuan-era drama, full of loyalty and betrayal. You're impressed these plays are like operas, but with more acrobatics. The crowd's eating it up, tossing coins when the hero lands a flip. You're starting to see Hangzhou's soul. It's not just about wealth, but stories that bind people together. You're exploring a temple now, its halls heavy with incense and the murmur of monks. The walls are painted with Buddhas and bodhisattvas, their eyes serene but somehow watching you. You're not religious, but the place feels sacred, like you should whisper. Marcos asking a monk about the statues, learning their gifts from Kublai to keep the city loyal. You're starting to get the politics the Khan's Mongol, but he's playing the Chinese game, funding temples to win hearts. Smart, but you're wondering how long the balancing act can last. You light a stick of incense just in case. Let's talk about Hangzhou's role in the empire because it's huge. This city's a cash cow, its taxes and trade filling Kublai's coffers. The Grand Canal links it to Canbalic, moving grain and goods like an economic artery. You're seeing the infrastructure up close, locks, warehouses, and ships that run like clockwork. It's not just about money. Hangzhou's a cultural beacon, with poets and painters flocking here. You're walking through a city that's both a machine and a muse, and it's no wonder Marco's smitten. You're starting to feel it too, even if your feet are begging for a break. You're at a tea house now, perched on a balcony overlooking a lake. The water's dotted with lotus flowers, and boats glide like they're part of a painting. You're sipping tea, still not your thing, but it's growing on you. And Marcos describing the city's nightlife, all lanterns and music. He's been sneaking out, apparently, catching shadow plays and street singers. You're half annoyed, half jealous, wishing you had his stamina. The tea house is packed with scholars debating something about Confucian taxes, and you're zoning out, lulled by the lake's ripple and the tea's warmth. Hey, race where the historians start squabbling. Did Marco really wander Hangzhou's streets? His book describes the city's bridges and markets in lush detail, but some say it's too generic, like he's riffing off a guidebook. Others point out specifics like the lake's pleasure boats that feel too vivid to be secondhand. You're not sure. Marcos right here, sketching a pagoda with a grin, and it seems real. But there's a nagging doubt his stories have a polished edge, like he's already framing them for Venice's gossips. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're starting to wonder if he's more poet than explorer. You're wrapping up the day at a silk shop, watching weavers turn threads into art. The looms clack in rhythm, and the fabric shimmers like liquid gold. Marcos asking about the process, learning they use mulberry-fed worms. Gross but cool. You're tempted to buy a scarf, but your budget's more bread and prayers than imperial silk. Marcos got no such problems, trading a Venetian trinket for a bolt of blue silk. You're starting to see why the Polos love this place. Every deal's a chance to connect, to learn, to bring a piece of Cathay home. You're back on the canal, heading to Canbalic tomorrow. The city's fading behind you, its lanterns glowing like fireflies. You're sprawled on the boat, your head full of Hangzhou's chaos and beauty. Marco's still talking, describing a garden he saw with rocks arranged like a poem. You're half asleep, but you can't help smiling. This city's a marvel, and whether Marco's tales are true or half-spun, they're pulling you deeper into Catay's spell. You're ready for the next stop, even if your legs are staging a quiet rebellion. You're sitting cross-legged on a woven mat in Canbalic, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and steamed rice. A festival's in full swing outside, and the streets pulse with drums, laughter, and the sizzle of street vendors' walks. You're in the middle of a Yuan dynasty celebration, surrounded by Mongols in fur hats and Chinese in silk robes, all mingling like it's the world's biggest block party. Marcos next to you, munching on a mooncake and trying to explain the holiday, something about the harvest and ancestors, but he's distracted by a lion dance in the distance. You nudge him, saying to focus, but you're just as caught up in the chaos. You're about to dive into Catay's culture, and it's like stepping into a kaleidoscope of traditions and quirks. You step outside, weaving through crowds to get a better view. Paper lanterns bob overhead, casting a warm glow on faces flushed with rice wine. You're at the Mid-Autumn Festival, a big deal in China, where families reunite and eat cake stuffed with red bean paste. You try one, and it's sweet, dense, like a dessert and a meal had a baby. Marcos already on his third, crumbs on his tunic, saying it's better than Venetian bread. You're not sure about that, but you're starting to love the vibe. Everyone's happy, sharing food, and tossing coins to dancers who twirl like human fireworks. Let's get the big picture. The Yuan dynasty's a cultural mashup, blending Mongol nomad roots with Chinese traditions that go back millennia. By the 1270s, Kublai Khan's empire is a crossroads of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and even a sprinkle of Islam and Christianity. You're in a world where festivals like this one keep people grounded, tying them to the land and each other. The Mongols might rule with an iron fist, but they're smart enough to let locals keep their customs mostly. You're seeing a society that's layered, vibrant, and occasionally messy, like a tapestry with a few loose threads. You're pulled into a crowd watching a dragon dance, the beast's silk body rippling as men hoist it on poles. It's mesmerizing, all scales and smoke, with gongs crashing like thunder. Marcos whispering that dragons are good luck, symbols of power and rain. You're nodding, but mostly wondering how they don't trip over each other under that costume. You're starting to get the rhythm of this place. Every ritual, every dance has a story, and the Chinese love their stories. You're a long way from Venice's church bells, but you're finding this just as soul-stirring, in its own loud way. Here's a quirky fact. The Chinese used kites not just for fun, but for military signals. You're at a park now, watching kids launch kites shaped like birds and fish, their strings slicing the sky. Marco says he heard soldiers use them to send messages or even scare enemies by making them whistle. You're picturing a battlefield with giant kites swooping like hawks, and it's equal parts cool and ridiculous. You grab a kite yourself, but it nosedives into a tree. Marco laughs, saying you're no general. You glare, but he's already running to help a kid untangle his string. You're invited to a family's home for dinner, and it's a crash course in etiquette. The table's round, loaded with dishes: pork dumplings, stir-fried greens, and a fish that's glaring at you. You're handed chopsticks, and it's like trying to write with twigs. Marcos not much better, dropping a dumpling in his lap, but the host, a cheerful merchant, just laughs and pours you tea. You're learning fast. Don't stick chopsticks in rice, pass dishes with both hands, and toast everyone like you're at a wedding. You're sweating from the effort, but the food's worth it, savory, spicy, and gone too soon. You're walking through a temple district now, the air heavy with incense. You pass a Buddhist shrine, monks chanting in low tones, then a Taoist altar with offerings of fruit and paper money. Marcos asking questions, trying to parse the difference. Buddhism's about enlightenment, Taoism's about balance, or so the priest says. You're half listening, more caught up in the vibe. Candles flickering, statues glowing, people praying for health or wealth. Kublai's empire lets all this coexist, but you're sensing tension. Some Chinese resent Mongol rule, clinging to their gods for comfort. You light a candle just to blend in. Let's talk about daily life because it's the heartbeat of this culture. You're seeing farmers sell rice at dawn, scholars debate poetry by noon, and families light lanterns at dusk. The Chinese have a knack for routine. Meals are communal, holidays are sacred, and even the way they fold clothes feels like art. You're starting to admire the order, even if you're still tripping over social rules. Marcos picking it up faster, bowing at the right moments and tossing out proverbs he half understands. You're jealous, but also proud this kid's becoming a bridge between worlds. You're at a calligraphy stall, watching an artist paint characters with a brush that dances on paper. The strokes are sharp, flowing, like a river caught in ink. Marcos trying it, his attempt looking like a toddler's scribble. You give it a go, and yours is worse. Ink splatters everywhere, and the artist chuckles. He says calligraphy's not just writing, it's a meditation, a way to capture the soul. You're not there yet, but you're starting to see the beauty. Marco buys a scroll, saying ITLL impress Kublai. You're betting it ends up lost in his luggage. Hey race, where the historians get grumpy. Did Marco really soak up this culture? His book mentions festivals and temples, but it's light on details like chopsticks or ancestor worship, stuff you'd think he'd notice. Some say he was here, just not paying attention. Others think he's parroting trader tales from a Persian inn. You're torn. Marcos right here, mangling a proverb to charm a vendor, and it feels authentic. But his stories have a gloss, like he's already editing for Venice's gossips. Historians are still debating this, and you're starting to wonder if he's more showman than scholar. You're wrapping up the night at a lantern market, the glow turning the street into a sea of stars. You're holding a paper lotus, its candle flickering as you set it on a canal to float away. Marco says it's for good fortune, and you're all for that. Your feet could use a break. The crowd's quieter now, families heading home, their laughter fading into the night. You're starting to love this place, its rituals and warmth pulling you in. Marco's still talking, describing a dance he saw, his voice a soft hum. You're half asleep, lulled by the canal's ripple and the weight of a full day. You're back at your guest house, sprawled on a mat, the festival's echoes in your head. Catay's culture is a puzzle old as stone, bright as silk, and you're just scratching the surface. Marco's sketching a lantern, his face lit by candlelight, and you're smiling despite yourself. Whether he's lived this or dreamed it, his passion's infectious. You're ready for the next adventure, even if it means more chopstick disasters. You're bouncing along a dusty road in a creaky cart, the Yunnan sun baking your skin like a loaf of bread. The air's heavy with the scent of pine and something floral you can't name. You're on a mission for Kublai Khan, sent to check out trade routes in the southern province, and it's a far cry from Kanbalik's polished palaces. Marcos beside you, his hat lopsided, scribbling notes about the jagged mountains looming ahead. You're not sure if he's thrilled or just pretending to be, but his chatter's the only thing keeping you from cursing the cart's wobbly wheels. You're deep in the Yuan Empire's fringes now, serving the Great Khan, and wondering if you'll make it back without losing a sandal or your sanity. You're traveling with a small caravan merchants, guards, and a grumpy Mongol official who keeps glaring at you like you stole his lunch. Nicolo and Mafio are back in Kanbalik, handling bigger deals, so it's just you and Marco, the teenage wonder, playing envoy. The road's rough, winding through forests and past villages where kids stare like you're from another planet. You wave, but they scatter, giggling. Marco's trying to learn the local dialect, mangling words until a guard laughs so hard he chokes on his water. You smirk. This kid's charm works even when his tongue doesn't. Let's talk about Kublai's empire because this mission's a piece of it. The Yuan dynasty's massive, and Kublai keeps it humming with a network of envoys like you, well, like Marco, since you're just tagging along. By the 1270s, his officials crisscross the empire, inspecting roads, collecting taxes, and sniffing out rebellion. Yunnan's a recent conquest, full of tribes who aren't thrilled about Mongol rule, so your job's part diplomat, part spy. You're checking if the silk and tea are flowing north and if the locals are behaving. It's not glamorous, but it's how Kublai stays king of the world. You're starting to respect the machine, even if the cart's rattling your bones. You stop at a village, a cluster of bamboo huts nestled in a valley. The locals offer rice and some spicy dish that makes your eyes water. You're eating with your hands because chopsticks are still your nemesis, and Marcos not much better, dropping half his meal. The village chief, a wiry man with a scar on his cheek, talks trade tea for silk, mostly with some jade thrown in. Marcos asking questions, his notebook open, jotting down how many carts pass through monthly. You're impressed he's young, but he's thorough, like a medieval auditor with better hair. You're starting to see why Kublai trusts him. Here's a quirky fact. Yunnan's tribes used cowrie shells as money, not Kublai's paper notes. You're holding one now, a tiny, glossy shell the chief gave you as a gift. Marco says the locals prefer them because they're pretty and hard to fake, unlike paper that rips. You're chuckling. Imagine Venice's merchants trying to pay with seashells. It's a reminder you're in a patchwork empire where not everyone buys into the Khan's big ideas. You pocket the shell, wondering if it'll impress anyone back home, or if they'll just think you're weird. You're back on the road, heading for Dali, a trading hub. The path snakes along a river, its water so clear you can see fish darting like arrows. You're passing terraced fields where farmers tend tea plants, their hats bobbing in the sun. Marcos rattling off facts about tea, how it's picked, dried, and shipped to Canbalik's elite. You're half listening, more focused on not falling out of the cart when it hits a rock. The landscape's stunning, but the road's a nightmare, and you're wondering why Kublai couldn't send you somewhere with better infrastructure. You reach Dali, and it's a lively mess. The market's packed with traders selling furs, herbs, and knives with carved handles. You're weaving through stalls, dodging a goat that's decided it owns the place. Marcos bargaining for a tea brick, compressed leaves shaped like a book, used as currency in some parts. He's getting good at this, charming the vendor with a mix of broken Chinese and wild gestures. You're proud, but also wondering when he sleeps. You grab a skewer of grilled mushrooms, savory and warm, and decide Dallas not half bad, even if the goat's still eyeing you. Let's dive into the mission stakes because it's not just about tea and shells. Yunnan's a frontier, and Kublai's grip here is shaky. The Mongols conquered it a couple of decades ago, but some tribes still raid caravans, and others just ignore the Khan's laws. You're here to report back. Are the roads safe? Is the trade steady? Is anyone plotting trouble? Marcos taking it seriously, asking merchants about bandit sightings and sketching maps of the routes. You're starting to see him as more than a kid with a notebook. He's Kublai's eyes, and you're his shadow, hoping you don't mess this up. You're invited to a local feast, and it's a riot of flavors. The table's piled with rice noodles, pickled greens, and a stew that's got your tongue dancing. You're trying to be polite, but the chili's winning, and you're gulping water like it's your job. Marcos holding his own, chatting with a trader about caravan schedules. The locals are wary but warm, sharing stories of their gods and mountains. You're learning about their festivals, where they dance with torches and sing to ancestors. It's wild, nothing like Canbalik's polished rituals, and you're starting to love the rawness of it. Here's where the historians start bickering. Did Marco really trek to Yunnan? His book describes Dallas markets and tea trade with flair, but some say it's too vague, like he's riffing off a merchant's yarn. Others point out details like the cowrie shells that feel too specific to be made up. You're not sure. Marcos right here, sketching a temple's curved roof, his face lit with excitement. It feels real, but his stories have a shine, like he's already crafting them for Venice's taverns. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're starting to wonder if he's weaving truth and flair in equal measure. You're wrapping up the mission, camping by a river under a sky so starry it hurts to look at. The caravan's quiet, guards snoring, and Marcos still awake, writing by firelight. He's describing Yunnan's people fierce, proud, tied to their land. You're half asleep, lulled by the river's murmur and the crackle of the fire. You're starting to see Cathay's edges, where the empire's power frays but its pulse is strong. Marcos your guide, and whether he's lived this or dreamed it, his words pull you deeper. You're ready for the next task, even if it means another bumpy cart ride. You're back in Kinbalik, sprawled on a cushioned bench in a quiet guest house. The hum of the city a distant murmur. Your Yunnan adventures left you dusty and sore, but you're glad to trade bumpy carts for silk pillows. Marcos across from you, his notebook open, scribbling about tea bricks and mountain trails. The candlelight flickers, casting shadows that dance like the doubts creeping into your head. You've seen Cathay's wonders, palaces, canals, festivals, but now you're wondering, is Marco's story as solid as it seems? You lean back, sipping tea that's still not your thing, ready to dig into the big question. Is this kid's tale truth, or just a really good yarn? You're flipping through Marcos' notes, pages crammed with sketches of bridges and markets. He's described everything: Kublai's throne, Hangzhou's lanterns, Yunnan's cowrie shells with a flair that's almost too vivid. You're starting to wonder if he's embellishing, like a bard juicing up a ballad. He catches you staring and grins, saying he's just capturing Catay's magic. You nod, but your gut's whispering, magic? Sure, but how much is real? You've been with him through cities and courts, but the more you hear, the more you question. You're not alone centuries later. People are still picking his story apart. Let's lay it out. Marco Polo's book, The Travels, is a medieval blockbuster, packed with tales of Catay's wealth and wonders. Written years from now, when he's back in Venice, it'll inspire explorers and spark debates. But here's the rub. Some folks, historians, not just tavern skeptics, think he never made it to China. They say his account's a mix of second-hand stories, gathered from Persian traders or his dad's old trips. You're torn. You've seen Marco charm Kublai, sketch canals, eat mooncakes. Feels real. But there's a nagging itch. His tales are so polished, they almost sound rehearsed. You're walking through Kinbalik's market, half listening to Marco haggle for a jade trinket. You're thinking about the evidence. His book nails some details: the paper money, the postal system, the layout of Xanadu's palace. You've seen these yourself, and he's not wrong. But then there's the weird stuff. Why no mention of the Great Wall, that massive stone snake you'd think he'd notice? Or tea, which everyone here drinks like water. You ask Marco about the wall casually, and he shrugs, saying he's been busy with trade routes. You're not buying it. Something's off, and you're starting to feel like a detective in a silk robe. Here's a quirky fact. Marco's book mentions burning rocks in Cathay coal, which was news to Europeans who were still chopping wood. You're passing a brazier now, its black lumps glowing red, warming a noodle stall. Marco points it out, saying it's everywhere here, cheap and hot. You're impressed he's right, and it's not something you'd guess from a Persian inn. There's a point in his favor, a detail that screams I was there. But then you remember he also talks about unicorns, which turn out to be rhinos. You're chuckling, unicorns? Really, Marco? Your detective hat's back on. You're sitting with a Mongol scribe, a friend of Marcos, who's heard the Polo tales. You're probing gently, asking if Marcos been to all the places he claims. The scribe nods, saying he's seen Marco at court, on missions, even chatting with Kublai about Venice's ships. You're reassured, but then the scribe adds that Marco loves stories, loves telling them, maybe more than living them. You lean back, sipping your tea, which is starting to taste like suspicion. The scribe's not doubting him outright, but his words plant a seed. Is Marco a traveler or a storyteller with a really good imagination? Let's talk about the skeptic's case because it's juicy. Some historians centuries from now will argue Marco never left the Black Sea, that he stayed in trading posts, soaking up gossip from merchants. They'll point to gaps. No Chinese names for places, no mention of foot binding, a custom you've noticed among some women here, their steps small and pained. You're starting to see their point. Marco's book is vivid but selective, like he's painting a picture but leaving out half the canvas. You're not ready to call him a liar, but you're wondering if he's more editor than explorer. You're at a tea house now, watching Marco charm a group of traders with a tale about Yunnan's mountains. They're eating it up, laughing, asking for more. You're smiling, but your mind's racing. He's good, too good, maybe. You pull him aside, asking why he skips stuff like the wall or tea in his notes. He blinks, saying he writes what stands out, what'll wow people back home. You're not satisfied. That's a writer's answer, not a traveler's. You're starting to think he's curating his story, picking details that'll make Venice gasp while dodging the mundane. Smart, but is it true? Hey race where the historians really duke it out. The Marco didn't go camp loves pointing to Chinese records or the lack of them. You've been poking around, talking to scribes, and it's true. No mention of Marco in the Yuan archives, at least not by name. A Venetian envoy serving Kublai should have left a paper trail, right? But then the pro-Marco folks counter that the Mongols weren't big on naming foreigners, and Marco wasn't exactly a governor, just a trusted errand boy. You're torn. The absence stings, but you've seen him in Kublai's court, so you're leaning toward believer for now. You're wandering the palace gardens, the air cool and heavy with lotus scent. You're thinking about Marco's role here. Kublai likes him, sends him on missions, asks about Europe. You've watched him navigate court politics, learn Chinese phrases, eat spicy noodles without flinching. That's not the resume of a guy faking it in Persia. But then you circle back to the gaps. Why no foot binding? Why no chopsticks? You're starting to wonder if he's filtering Cathay through a Venetian lens, keeping what's exotic and tossing what's too foreign. It's not lying exactly, but it's not the full picture either. You're back at the guest house, the city quiet under a crescent moon. Marcos asleep, his notebook open to a sketch of a canal. You're flipping through it, seeing Cathay through his eyes, dazzling, grand, a bit too perfect. You're starting to think he's telling a truth, but not the whole truth. Maybe he's been here, but his story's a performance, shaped for an audience that's never seen a pagoda. Historians are still wrestling with this, and you're right there with them, caught between awe and doubt. You close the notebook, blow out the candle, and let the questions simmer. You're ready for the next piece of the puzzle. You're lounging in a Canbalic tea house, the air hazy with steam and the murmur of scholars debating poetry. Your Yunnan mission's a fading memory, and you're back to sipping tea that's still more bitter than you'd like. Marcos across from you, flipping through his notebook, his pen scratching out a description of a jade market. You're still chewing on the doubts from last night. His stories are dazzling, but those gaps, like missing the Great Wall or tea, keep nagging you. Today, you're diving deeper, poking at what Marco left out of his tales and why it matters. You lean forward, ready to play detective again, wondering if these omissions are just oversights or a clue to something bigger. You're thinking about the Great Wall first because it's hard to ignore literally. You've heard whispers about it from merchants, a stone giant snaking across the north, built to keep out invaders. You've never seen it yourself, stuck in the empire's heart, but it's famous, right? So why doesn't Marco mention it? You ask him, keeping it casual, and he shrugs, saying he's been busy with Kublai's errands, not chasing old fortifications. You're not convinced. A wall that big isn't just scenery, it's a statement. You're starting to wonder if he missed it because he wasn't where he claims, or if he just didn't think Venice would care. Let's break it down. Marco's book, The Travels, is a love letter to Catay's wonders, palaces, canals, paper money, but it skips stuff you'd expect a traveler to notice. The Great Wall's a big one, but there's also tea drunk everywhere and foot binding, that painful custom you've seen among some women, their feet wrapped tight to look elegant. You're puzzled. These aren't minor details, they're part of Catay's pulse. You're starting to think Marcos either blind or filtering his story, picking waddle-dazzle Europeans and tossing what's too strange or mundane. You're not calling him a fraud yet, but you're raising an eyebrow. You're walking through Kanbalik streets now, dodging carts and sniffing dumplings that smell like heaven. You're thinking about tea, how it's everywhere, from tea houses to temples. You're holding a cup now, warm and fragrant, and it's the backbone of every social moment here. Marcos never mentioned it, not once. You nudge him, asking why, and he laughs, saying it's just a drink, not worth writing about. You're floored. Just a drink? It's like saying Venice's canals are just water. You're starting to suspect he's curating his tale, keeping it exotic but not too alien for folks back home. Erase a quirky tidbit. Foot binding wasn't just fashion, it was a status symbol, mostly for wealthy women, signaling they didn't need to work. You're passing a noblewoman now, her steps tiny, her face tight with effort. It's unsettling, and you can't imagine missing it if you lived here. Marcos' book doesn't breathe a word about it. You're wondering if he skipped it because it's too grim for his grand adventure, or because he never saw it up close. Either way, it's a hole in his story, and you're adding it to your mental list of things that don't add up. You're sitting with a Chinese merchant, a friend of the Polos who's heard Marcos' tales. You're probing, asking if Marcos been to all the places he describes. The merchant nods, saying he's seen Marco on missions, talking with Kublai, sketching markets. But then he pauses, adding that Marco's stories are big, like paintings that leave out the cracks. You lean back, swirling your tea. That's it, isn't it? Marcos painting a picture, not a photograph. He's not lying, but he's selective, shaping Cathay into a myth for Venice's dreamers. You're starting to get why his book feels like a blockbuster it's meant to be. Let's talk about why these omissions matter, because they're not just nitpicks. The Great Wall, tea, foot binding, their cultural anchors, things that define China. If Marco was here, living this life, wouldn't he notice them? Historians centuries from now will use these gaps to argue he never left Persia, that he wove his book from trader gossip. You're not ready to go that far. You've seen him charm Kublai, eat noodles, sketch canals. But the omissions suggest he's not telling the whole story, maybe because he's more storyteller than scientist. You're starting to see him as a guy who loves the spotlight, not just the road. You're at a palace library now, surrounded by scrolls that smell of ink and time. You're flipping through a Chinese text, pretending to, since you can't read it, thinking about Marcos' audience. Back in Venice, people want tales of gold and dragons, not foot binding or tea rituals. You're starting to think he tailored his story for them, cutting what wouldn't sell. Smart, but it makes you uneasy. You ask Marco, half joking, if he's writing for truth or fame. He grins, saying both, and you're not sure if he's kidding. You're starting to like this kid, but you're also watching him closer. Hey race, where the historians get loud. Some say Marcos' omissions prove he was never here, that he's a medieval conman spinning yarns. Others argue he was here but focused on what would wow Europeans like paper money or Kublai's zoo. You're torn. The coal, the postal system, the silk markets, those feel too real to be made up. But the missing pieces, tea, the wall, chopsticks, gnaw at you. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're right in the middle, trying to decide if Marcos a genius or a glorified gossip. You're leaning toward genius, but only just. You're wrapping up the day in the guest house, the city quiet under a starry sky. Marcos asleep, his notebook open to a sketch of a pagoda. You're flipping through it, seeing Cathay through his eyes, grand, glittering, but incomplete. You're starting to think his omissions aren't lies, but choices made to craft a story that'll echo across oceans. You're not sure if that makes him less trustworthy or more brilliant. You close the notebook, blow out the candle, and let the questions settle. You're ready to see what else he's hiding or revealing next. You're perched on a wooden stool in a Canbalic inn, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cheap wine. The room's buzzing with traders swapping stories, their voices a jumble of Persian, Mongol, and broken Chinese. You're nursing a cup of rice wine, which is stronger than you expected, and flipping through Marco's notebook, now a dog-eared mess of sketches and scribbles. Your detective hat's still on, and you're digging into other account stories from travelers, scribes, anyone who might back up or bust Marco's claims about Cathay. You're starting to feel like you're piecing together a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing, and the other half don't fit. Marcos at the bar, charming a Persian merchant with a tale about Yunnan tea, and you're wondering, does anyone else's story match his? You're thinking about other travelers first because the Silk Road's crawling with them. You've met a few Turks, Arabs, even a monk from India, all carrying tales of cities and courts. None are as flashy as Marcos, but they're your best shot at cross-checking. You lean over to a grizzled trader, his beard streaked with gray, and ask if he's been to Kublai's palace. He nods, describing a throne room with golden pillars, just like Marcos notes. You're encouraged, but then he mentions a festival Marco never wrote about with dancers on stilts. You frown. WHYD, Marco skipped that. You're starting to wonder if he's cherry-picking or just wasn't there. Let's set the stage. The 13th century is a golden age for travel, thanks to the Mongol Empire's roads and relays. You're in a world where a Moroccan named Ibn Battuta will soon wander from Mali to China, and monks like Rabban Bar Sauma are trekking from Beijing to Rome. Their accounts, some written later, are your yardstick for Marcos. You're not holding their books, most aren't even written yet, but you're hearing echoes of their stories in the inn's chatter. The Mongol Empire's a giant crossroads, and you're trying to see if Marcos' tale holds up against the crowds. You're chatting with a Chinese scribe now, a quiet guy who works in Kublai's archives. You're fishing, asking if he's heard of foreigners like the Polos serving the Khan. He nods, saying Kublai loves outsiders, Persians, Uyghurs, even Christians, because they're loyal, not tied to local clans. You're perked up. That fits Marco's story of being Kublai's errand boy. But then the scribe says he's never seen a Venetian in the records, at least not by name. You're deflated. No paper trail? You're starting to think Marcos either too small to notice or not as official as he claims. Heres, a quirky fact. The Mongols used a script called Fags Pa, invented by a Tibetan monk to unify their empire's languages. You're seeing it on a merchant's seal now, all sharp angles and loops like a code you can't crack. Marco mentions it in his book, describing it as the Khan's official writing. You're impressed he's right, and it's not something you'd pick up in a Persian bazaar. It's a point for him, a detail that feels like he's been here rubbing elbows with scribes. But then you remember he skips bigger stuff like tea. You're back to square one, your detective notebook a mess of pros and cons. You're digging into Ibn Battuta's tales next, or at least what you've heard of them. He's not here yet, he's a generation away, but traders are already passing around stories of a Moroccan whole visit China. You hear he describes Hangzhou's markets, much like Marco, but with more grit. Crowded docks, fishy smells, pickpockets. Marco's Hangzhou is all silk and lanterns, almost too pretty. You're starting to think Ibn Battuta's got a sharper eye for the messy bits, while Marco's painting a dream for Venice. is not proof he wasn't here, but it makes you wonder if he's glossing over the rough edges. Let's talk about the Chinese records because they're the gold standard. The Yuan Shi, the dynasty's official history, is being compiled now, and you're imagining it as a giant ledger of everything Kublai does. You ask the scribe if it mentions foreigners serving the Khan. He shrugs, saying it's mostly about battles and taxes, not every random envoy. You're frustrated, no Marco, no Polos, nothing. But then you recall the Mongols often used nicknames or titles, not birth names. Maybe Marco's in there as that chatty Italian. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're stuck in the middle, wishing for a clear answer. You're back at the inn, listening to a Nestorian monk who's traveled from Syria to Kinbalik. He's talking about Kublai's court, mentioning the same paper money and postal relays Marco loves. You're nodding, this lines up, and it's solid evidence Marco's been here. But then the monk describes a Christian church in Hangzhou, with bells and hymns that Marco never mentions. You're baffled. A church would have caught his eye, right? You're starting to think he's either blind to anything not shiny or he's skipping stuff that doesn't fit his Marvels of Cathay vibe. You're wrapping up the night, sprawled on a mat in the guest house. Marco's asleep, his notebook open to a sketch of a relay station. You're flipping through it, comparing his words to the traders' tales. There's overlap: paper money, silk markets, Kublai's zoo, but also gaps, like that church or the stilts dancers. You're starting to think Marco's story is true but tilted, shaped to wow rather than document. Other accounts fill in some blanks, but they raise new questions. You close the notebook, blow out the candle, and let the puzzle rest. You're ready to see what Marco's tale inspires next. You're lounging in a Kinbalik guest house, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and wax from a flickering candle. Outside, the city hums, vendors packing up, guards clanking on patrol. Marco sprawled across from you, his notebook a mess of ink and doodles, muttering about a spice market he saw today. You're still wrestling with his story's holes, missing walls. Skip tea, but now you're shifting gears, wondering how his tales will ripple beyond this room. You're thinking about the future, how Marco's words will light fires in minds far from Cathay, sparking voyages and dreams. You lean back, sipping rice wine that's finally growing on you, ready to explore how this kid's book will shape history. You're picturing Venice years from now, when Marco's back, spinning yarns in taverns. His book, The Travels, won't just be a memoir, it'll be a match tossed into Europe's imagination. You're seeing sailors and scholars poring over it, their eyes wide at tales of golden palaces and paper money. You're not there yet, but you can feel the potential in Marco's scribbles, the way he makes Cathay sound like a place you'd risk everything to see. You're starting to think this kid's not just a traveler, he's a catalyst, planting seeds that'll grow into expeditions and empires. Let's set the stage. By the late 13th century, Europe's itching for the East. The Crusades have opened doors to Asia, and merchants like the Polos are proof there's gold beyond the horizon. Marco's book, when it hits, will be a bombshell, a first-hand account of a world most Europeans can't even dream of. You're imagining knights in France, traders in Genoa, even priests in Rome, reading about Kublai's court and thinking, we need to get there. You're starting to see why his story matters. Gaps and all, it's not just about truth, it's about inspiration. You're walking through Kinbalik's market with Marco, dodging carts piled with silk. You're thinking about Christopher Columbus, a guy wholesale west centuries from now, chasing Asia. You've heard whispers of his dreams, or maybe you're just projecting, but hell, read Marco's book. Those pages about Catay's rich as silk, spices, cities of a million will burn in his mind, pushing him to find a new route. You're chuckling because Columbus will end up in the Americas, not China, but Marcos the Spark. You nudge him, saying his notes might start trouble. He grins, clueless, and keeps sketching a pagoda. Here's a quirky fact. Marcos' book will describe Zipangu or Japan, a land of gold he never visits but hears about from Kublai's failed invasions. You're at a stall now, eyeing a lacquered box that might be Japanese, traded through Korea. Marcos asking the vendor about it, learning it's worth a fortune in Kanbalik. His book will hype Zipangu's wealth, and centuries later, explorers like Columbus will chase it, thinking it's just over the horizon. You're amused Marcos tossing myths into his story, and they'll send ships across oceans. You're starting to see him as a dreamer who moves the world, even if he's off on the details. You're sitting with a Mongol trader, a guy who's been to Persia and back. You're asking how stories travel, how tales of Cathay reach Europe. He says merchants like him carry them, swapping gossip at every relay station. You're realizing Marcos' book will be part of this chain, but amplified a written record, not just bar talk. You're imagining it copied by monks, read by kings, fueling a hunger for the East. The trader mentions Marcos' dad, Niccolo, telling stories years ago that got Venice buzzing. You're thinking Marcos just upping the game, turning whispers into a shout. Let's talk about the big picture because this is where it gets wild. Marcos' book will kickstart the age of exploration, or at least pour fuel on it. You're seeing navigators like Vasco da Gama, Magellan, all chasing the wealth Marco describes. His words will make Asia real, not a fairy tale, but a place you can sail to. You're starting to grasp the stakes. His book isn't just a travelogue, it's a map to ambition, even if it's fuzzy on facts. You're wondering how many ships will sail, how many lives will shift because of this kid's pen. You're at a palace banquet now, watching Marco chat with a Chinese scholar about star charts. You're thinking about science, how Marco's tales of compasses and coal will nudge Europe's thinkers. His book will mention Chinese printing too, and you're imagining Gutenberg, decades from now, tinkering with presses, maybe inspired by a stray page of the Travels. You're getting ahead of yourself, but you can't help it. Marcos not just seeing Cathay, he's carrying its ideas home. You're starting to think his legacy's bigger than gold, it's about knowledge, even if he flubs the details. Hey, race where the historians get testy. Some say Marcos' influence is overblown, that Europe would have explored without him. Others argue his book was a game changer, putting Asia on the map for sailors and dreamers. You're torn. You've seen Marcos' passion, his knack for making Cathay irresistible. But you know his gaps too. The wall makes skeptics scoff. Historians are still debating this, and you're leaning toward Team Marco because even if he's half right, he's lighting a fire. You're starting to think truth matters less than the spark. You're wrapping up the night in the guest house, the city asleep under a velvet sky. Marcos out cold, his notebook open to a sketch of Kublai's zoo. You're flipping through it, seeing Cathay through his eyes, a place of wonder, worth crossing oceans for. You're starting to believe his story's power isn't in its accuracy, but its pull, its ability to make people move. You close the notebook, snuff the candle, and let the thoughts settle. You're ready to see how Marcos' tale plays out and what it leaves behind. You're slumped in a Kanbalik tea house, the air soft with steam and the clink of porcelain cups. The city's waking up outside, carts rattling, vendors shouting about fresh lotus roots. Marcos across from you, his notebook open, sketching a canal lock with the focus of a monk copying scripture. You're still buzzing from thoughts of his book's future, Columbus, new worlds, all sparked by this kid's tales. But now you're turning to the present, or rather the future's lens on the past. You're digging into how modern scholars, centuries from now, will pick apart Marco's journey, armed with new finds and old doubts. You sip your tea, finally starting to like it, ready to see if today's detectives can crack the case of Marco Polo. You're imagining a world far from now, where historians with fancy degrees and fancier computers comb through Marco's travels. They've got tools you can't dream of: dig sites, DNA, databases of dusty scrolls. You're picturing them squinting at his words, cross-referencing them with Chinese records, Mongol letters, even bones pulled from Silk Road graves. You're curious. Will they prove Marco stood here, in Kublai's court, or call him a Venice barfly spinning yarns? You lean back, listening to the tea house chatter, wondering what clues the city holds for those future sleuths. Let's lay it out. Modern scholarship's a mixed bag on Marco. By the 21st century, some like Francis Wood will argue he never made it past Persia, piecing his book from trader gossip. Others, like Hans Ulrich Vogel, will defend him, pointing to details only an eyewitness could know, like Catay's paper money system. You're torn. You've seen Marco charm Kublai, sketch canals, eat noodles like a local. But those gaps, tea, the Great Wall, chopsticks still itch. You're starting to think the truth's messier than a yes or no answer, and modern finds might just muddy the waters further. You're wandering Kanbalik's market, dodging a cart of cabbages, thinking about archaeology. Future digs will unearth yuan coins, silk fragments, even relay station ruins along the Silk Road. You're picturing a scholar finding a shard of Venetian glass in Xanadu, proof the Polos were here or just traded here. You ask Marco about his family's trade goods, and he mentions glass beads they swapped in Yunnan. You're intrigued. That's a breadcrumb, something tangible. If future diggers find those beads, it's a point for Marco. But you know one shard won't settle the debate. ITLL, just start a new one. Erase a quirky fact. Marco describes asbestos in his book, a cloth that doesn't burn, used in Cathay for fireproof bags. You're passing a stall now, where a merchant's selling a weird, fibrous fabric he claims is heat-proof. Marco's eyeing it, saying it's mined in the north, near coal deposits. You're impressed he's right, and asbestos was rare knowledge in Europe. Modern scholars will love this, using it to argue he saw things firsthand. But then you remember he also talks about giant snakes, probably crocs, and you're chuckling. Marco's a mix of sharp and shaky, and future experts will bicker over every word. You're sitting with a Mongol scribe, a guy who's seen Marco at court. You're probing, asking if Marco's missions like that Yunnan trip left records. The scribe shrugs, saying envoys come and go, and only big shots get written down. You're deflated, no paper trail again. But modern scholars will dig deeper, finding Mongol tax logs or trade permits that might mention foreigners in Kublai's service. You're hoping they'll spot a hint of the Polos, but you know it's a long shot. The Yuan archives are vast, and Marco's just a speck in this empire story. Let's talk about what's new. 21st century tech will change the game. You're imagining satellites mapping Silk Road routes, showing exactly where Marco might have walked. Chemical tests on bones will reveal diets, maybe proving Venetians ate Cathay rice. You're getting excited, but then you recall the skeptics. They'll say Marco could have heard about asbestos or paper money in Persia. No travel required. You're starting to see why this debate's still alive. Every find, every coin or scroll can be spun two ways. Historians are still arguing over this, and you're right there with them, caught in the tangle. You're at a palace library now, surrounded by scrolls that smell of dust and secrets. You're pretending to read one, but really you're thinking about Marco's defenders. They'll point to his description of salt taxes, a yuan system so complex only an insider would get it. You've seen the tax collectors here, their ledgers thick with numbers. Marco's notes mention them, and you're nodding that specific, hard to fake. But then you recall his silence on foot binding, and you're back to doubting. Modern scholars will wrestle with this, balancing his hits and misses like accountants of truth. You're wrapping up the day in the guest house, the city quiet under a sliver of moon. Marcos asleep, his notebook open to a sketch of a relay horse. You're flipping through it, seeing Cathay through his eyes, vivid, grand, but patchy. You're starting to think modern research won't solve the mystery, just add layers. A coin here, a scroll there, and the debate rolls on. You close the notebook, snuff the candle, and let the questions drift. You're ready to follow Marco home, to see how his story lands. You're swaying on a creaky ship, the sea a restless gray beneath you, salt spray stinging your cheeks. Kanbalik's golden roofs are a memory, and you're heading west, back to Venice after nearly 2 decades in Cathay. The air smells of fish and tar, and the crew's shouts mix with the groan of ropes. Marcos leaning against the railing, his notebook tucked away, his face a mix of relief and something heavier, homesickness. Maybe, or the weight of leaving Kublai's empire. You're not sure if you're thrilled to be heading home or dreading the long road ahead. But you're with the Polos, tracing their return and the birth of Marco's book. You grip the deck, hoping the waves don't ruin your shoes, ready to see how this journey ends. You're part of a grand escort, sailing with a Mongol princess, Coco Chin, bound for Persia to marry a Khan. Kublai's trusted the Polos Nicolo, Mafio, and Marco to deliver her. A final mission after years of service. You're on a fleet of junks, their sails like dragon wings, cutting through the South China Sea. Marco's quieter now, less the chatty teen you met in Venice. He's 30-something, weathered, with stories etched in his eyes. You nudge him, asking if he's ready for home, and he shrugs, saying Venice feels like a dream. You're starting to wonder if Catay's changed him too much to fit back in. Let's set the scene. It's 1292, and you're leaving the Yuan dynasty after 17 years. The Polos have seen it all: palaces, markets, wars, and Kublai's finally let them go. Partly because he's fond of them, partly because this princess needs safe passage. The route's brutal: south through Southeast Asia, around India, up to Persia, then overland to the Mediterranean. You're looking at years of travel, storms, and sketchy ports. You're already regretting not packing better socks, but Marco's calm, like he's done this before. You're hoping his luck holds, because the sea's not forgiving. You're docked at a steamy port in Sumatra, the air thick with spice and sweat. You're bartering for fruit mangoes, tart and juicy, while Marco haggles with a local for fresh water. The princess, Coco Chin, is tucked away on the lead ship, guarded like a jewel. You're impressed by the Polos' hustle, their managing supplies, calming nervous sailors, even soothing Coco Chin when the storms hit. Marco scribbling notes, describing the island's coconut trees and tattooed traders. You're starting to think he's addicted to writing, like he's already planning his book. You're curious. Will it capture this chaos, or just the shiny bits? Erase a quirky fact. The fleet's carrying unicorn horns, probably narwhal tusks, as gifts for the Persian Khan. You're eyeing one now, a spiral of ivory on the deck, and Marco says it's worth more than gold. You're chuckling Venice will eat this up, thinking it's magic. It's a reminder that Marco's tales, even the true ones, get a mythical glow. You're starting to see how his book will blend fact and fantasy, making Cathay a fairy tale for Europe. You're wondering if that's deliberate, or if he just can't help himself. You're sailing again, The Indian Ocean a vast, rolling beast. Storms batter the fleet, and you're clinging to a rope, praying you don't end up fish food. Marcos helping the crew, his Venetian sea legs steady, shouting orders in a mix of Chinese and Italian. You're impressed he's not just a court pet, he's a survivor. The journey's brutal. Disease picks off sailors, ships sink, and you're down to a fraction of the fleet by the time you reach Persia. You're exhausted, but Marco's still writing, describing monsoons like they're poetry. You're starting to think this guy's unstoppable. You're in Hormuz, a dusty Persian port, dropping off Cochin. The Khan's court is grand but no Canbalic, and you're sensing Marcos' heart's still in Cathay. The Polos are free now, heading overland through Armenia and Trebizond to the Black Sea. You're on horseback, the road rocky, bandits a constant whisper. Marcos quieter, reflecting on Kublai, the empire, the years that shaped him. You ask what hell tell Venice, and he says, everything, but his eyes say it's complicated. You're starting to feel the weight of his story, the burden of making it real for folks who've never seen a pagoda. Let's talk about the book's birth, because it's coming. You're not there yet, but you know Marco will end up in a Genoa prison in 1298, captured during a naval spat with Venice's rival. There, hell meet rustic hello, a writer whole turn his stories into the travels. You're imagining them in a damp cell, Marco talking about silk markets while rustic hello scribbles, maybe adding his own flair. You're wondering how much of the book will be Marco's voice, how much Rusticello's polish. You're starting to see why it reads like a saga, two storytellers, one epic. Hey race where the historians get antsy. Some say the return journey proves Marco was in Cathay because he'd fake a decades-long trip. Others argue he could have heard about Persia's ports and princesses in Black Sea markets. You're torn. You've watched Marco navigate storms, barter in Sumatra, mourn lost sailors. Feels too raw to be made up. But those gaps tea chopsticks still nag. Historians are still debating this, and you're leaning toward believer but with an asterisk. Marco's story is big, but it's not perfect. You're nearing Venice, sailing the Mediterranean now. It's blue, a stark contrast to Asia's wild seas. You're docked in Constantinople briefly, the city's domes gleaming like a faded echo of Xanadu. Marco's home is close, but he's not the kid who left. You're seeing a man shaped by Cathay, carrying stories that'll change the world or at least get him laughed at in taverns. You're ready to see how his tale lands and what it means to bring Cathay home. You're standing on a Venice dock, the air sharp with salt and the tang of home. It's 1295, and the canals glisten under a weak winter sun, gondolas bobbing like old friends. You're with Marco, now in his 40s, his face lined from years in Cathay, his eyes still bright with stories. Niccolò and Maffio are haggling with a merchant, their Venetian hustle unchanged, but Marco's quieter, clutching a satchel stuffed with notes. You're back where this all began, and you're wondering what his tales of Kublai's empire will mean here, in a city that smells of fish and ambition. You adjust your cloak, feeling the weight of his journey, ready to unpack the legacy of this traveler, truth, tale, or something in between. You're walking through Venice's narrow alleys, dodging puddles and kids chasing a stray dog. The city's the same, loud, crowded, dripping with wealth, but it feels small after Canbalic sprawl. Marcos getting stares, his silk tunic out of place among woolen cloaks. You overhear whispers. That's Polo, the one who went east. Some nod, impressed, others smirk, muttering about fairy tales. You're starting to see the challenge he's got to sell Cathay to a city that thinks it's the center of the world. You nudge him, asking if he's ready, and he smiles, saying they'll listen. You're not so sure. Let's talk big picture. Marco's Travels, born a few years from now in a Genoa prison, will be more than a book, it's a bridge between worlds. By the 1300s, Venice is hungry for the East, but Cathay's a myth, a place of dragons and gold. Marco's words will make it real, or at least real enough to send ships sailing. You're imagining merchants reading about paper money, scholars puzzling over compasses, explorers dreaming of Zipangu's gold. His legacy isn't just the story, it's the curiosity it sparks, the push to see what's beyond the horizon. You're starting to think he's a catalyst, gaps and all. You're in a tavern now, the air thick with wine and skepticism. Marcos telling a small crowd about Kublai's palace, his hands painting a throne room of marble and jade. You're watching their faces, some lean in, eyes wide, others scoff, calling him Il Million, the million liar, for his wild numbers. You're chuckling, it's a nickname that'll stick. He mentions burning rocks, coal, and a merchant perks up, intrigued. You're nodding, that's the Marco effect, planting seeds of wonder, even if half the room thinks he's spinning yarn. You're starting to see his power. He doesn't need everyone to believe, just enough to dream. Here's a quirky fact. Marco's book will mention a great river in Cathay, likely the Yangtze, so wide it feels like a sea. You're thinking about it now, remembering boats gliding past Hangzhou's docks. Venice's canals are puddles by comparison, and you're wondering how hell make locals grasp that scale. His book will try describing fleets of barges and fish the size of dogs. You're smiling, exaggeration or not, it's the kind of image that sticks, that makes a sailor wonder what's out there. His legacy's in those pictures, painted with words. You're at the Polo family home, a stone house near the Rialto. It's cozy but cluttered, maps and silk bolts strewn everywhere. Marcos sorting his notes, years of scribbles from Yunnan to Sumatra. You're helping or pretending to while thinking about his impact. His book will inspire Columbus, wholesale west chasing Cathay and find a new world by mistake. It'll nudge mapmakers to redraw Asia, traders to chase silk, even poets to sing of Xanadu. You're starting to feel the ripple. Marcos, not just a man, he's a spark that'll light centuries. You're walking to St. Mark's Square, the basilica's domes glowing in the dusk. Marcos talking about Kublai, how the Khan's curiosity shaped him. You're realizing that's his legacy, to not just the book, but the spirit of asking what's next. You're seeing it in his eyes, the way he still scans the horizon. Even here, Venice might laugh or believe, but his story's bigger than this city. It's about daring to go, to see, to tell. You're starting to think that's what matters, whether every word's true or not. Hey, race where the historians chime in. Some will call Marco a fraud, saying his gaps the wall prove he never left Persia. Others will defend him, citing coal, salt taxes, details too precise for gossip. You're torn. You've watched him charm Kublai, sketch pagodas, survive storms. Feels real. But those omissions nag like cracks in a mosaic. Historians are still debating this, and you're leaning toward believer because his passion's too raw to be fake. His legacy, though, isn't about settling the argument, it's about starting it, about making the world bigger. You're wrapping up the day in the tavern again, the crowd thinner, the fire low. Marcos quiet now, sipping wine, his satchel of notes at his side. You're thinking about his life after this prison, fame, a quiet death in Venice. His book will outlive him, carrying Cathay to corners hell never see. You're starting to love this guy, flaws and all, because he dared to dream big. You raise a glass, silently toasting his journey, ready to let his story settle into the night. You're drifting now, the tavern's hum fading like a distant song. The canals outside are still, their ripples catching starlight, whispering of voyages yet to come. You're not in Venice anymore. Not really. You're somewhere softer, where Marco's tales blend with dreams. His voice, all those stories of silk and khans, wraps around you like a warm blanket, guiding you deeper into the night. Let the debates rest, the questions fade. You're sailing on a sea of words, carried by a traveler's heart, and it's enough. Sleep's calling, gentle as a tide, pulling you under with a promise of new horizons. Good night.